Again, a hearty welcome, and we're delighted to have you in front of us. I am one of your senior judges. My name is Joe Wilkins, and along with me is Heather, Chase, and Daria. Together, we're just delighted and excited to be here. We know you've worked extremely hard to get here to this day. And so I'm just going to go over some of the ground rules and how we see the presentations playing out here, and then we'll get started. So, so as we start, this is part of the competition, and you are taking on a fictitious business identity and assigning a fictitious business identity to the judges. And so I believe you have us set up as the board of directors. And so so we'll be in that mode as we are listening, and also as we have inquiry and questions for you later on. So please make sure everyone knows who you are and your introductions, and as you begin. Also, you have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend solutions that pass muster on all three counts. During this time, you will be uninterrupted, and you will, when you are finished, we, the judges, will ask you questions for about 10 to 15 minutes. And during that Q&A, it's important that we all stay in character as we ask those questions and respond to those questions. After those questions, we'll have some period of time for some coaching and mentorship as we provide feedback outside of that section of our dialogue. And so with that, are there any questions? Okay, so we're gonna also, as we get close to 25 minutes, you'll see a signal of something, maybe 1-2 minutes, so you'll know where we're at there, okay?
Our world is growing. In fact, in the next 30 years, it's expected that our population will exceed 9 billion people. And with this growth comes an increase in demand for food production. However, the processes that we're currently using are depleting the very resources that we need to survive. About 1/3 of the greenhouse gases are from food production. 1/2 of of waterways for fresh water are polluted due to food production. And 93% of the world's biomass in mammals is used only in livestock for food production. Ultimately, we need to find a way to meet this food demand without destroying these key resources. That's what we're here to talk to you today about, Cargill's Board of Directors. We are going to analyze your current production process and explain how you may be fighting world hunger, but you're doing so by destroying the planet. We are Sustainable Solutions Consulting. My name is Megan, and I'm here today with my teammates Joe, Flor, Bella, and Harvey. But let's talk about you. Cargill, you are one of the largest companies in the agricultural and food production spaces. You are the largest private company in the United States. You pride yourself on the mission statement to nourish the world and create a better planet. You've donated $30 million to stop deforestation. You've given back 16 million meals in support of COVID-19 relief. And you founded the Cargill Foundation, which strives to make the world a better place. But there's something missing. Because in 2018, you were also named the worst company in the world for your destructive environmental practices. In fact, there's an entire Wikipedia page devoted entirely to criticisms of your company. So where is this disconnect? How are these not matching up? This has to do with your size. As I said when I started, your company is huge. Your reach is massive. You have $115 billion in annual revenue. You have a presence in more than 70 countries worldwide, and you employ more than 166,000 employees. You make up for 1/4 of the grain and meat exports for the United States. With this extensive reach, you have a great responsibility. So every action you take has a significant impact. It's not enough to do some good while also causing harm. you have an ethical duty to mitigate the risk of unethical decisions being made. This is your ethical obligation. It's also very important that you consider the UN Sustainable Development Goals. My team has identified 3 key goals that are integral to your process. I'm going to go over those right now so we're all on the same page. These are Goal 2, end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. Goal 8, promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. And Goal 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Today, we will go over your current process. We will evaluate it on legal, financial, and ethical frameworks. We will then propose our solution to connect you to key stakeholders, to correct problematic practices, and ultimately to commit to a realistic plan going forward to make you a sustainable leader. This will increase your transparency with your stakeholders and ultimately allow you to meet your UN sustainability goals. To first evaluate your process, I'm going to hand it over to Harvey.
Thanks very much, Megan. So, like Megan said, in order to evaluate why your current operations are unsustainable, we looked through a framework of legal, financial, and ethical perspectives. I'm going to begin by evaluating that legal perspective. The most obvious legal repercussion of the unsustainable behavior Cargill is currently operating under are the fines that you've been incurred to over the past 20 years. Since 2000, Cargill has had 184 separate citations, totaling $175 million in fines. These are for a variety of different reasons, ranging from financial malpractice in 2019 to violating the Clean Air Act in 2005, where Cargill was obligated to pay $130 million to clean up a plant in the United States. However, outside of the direct consequence of these fines, a more pressing legal question that has more serious repercussions for the board is the current Supreme Court case that Cargill is involved in, Cargill versus Doe, where the Supreme Court is analyzing the repercussions of the Alien Tort Statute. In this case, Cargill and co-defendant Nestle are being accused of employing child slavery in countries outside of the United States in their supply chain. The important aspect here is that in Cargill's defense, they are not claiming that they don't use child slavery in their supply chain. They're claiming that the United States Supreme Court doesn't have the jurisdiction to legislate in this regard. Why is this important? It's important because it establishes that your scale is so large. As a supranational organization, there's no one legislative body that can actually have the power and scale to legislate and confine your organization in any significant legal or ethical boundary. Therefore, in order to remedy this legal situation, you'll have to employ internal controls. You'll have to check your own operations and stop these problems internally before they arise. The onus is on you to catch these problems, since no one legislative body can catch them themselves. Moving on to the financial aspect of this unsustainable operation. We've looked at 2 separate financial impacts. Here we've divided our costs into direct costs and indirect costs. The obvious direct costs are those legal citations that I just described, the about $200 million in the past 20 years. And these fines are only rising. Like I pointed out, in 2005, one citation incurred a $130 million penalty. So incurring 1 or 2 more citations of that magnitude would massively increase the scale of this direct cost. However, the more material expense is on the indirect side. According to Chain Reaction Research, you have about $19 billion worth of value currently at risk of being regulated. The way this would play out, for example, is if members of your supply chain adopt policies such as zero deforestation initiatives, which would limit them from using you as a vendor or a member of their supply chain. Additionally, being labeled one of the worst companies in the world in regards to ethical practices has negative consequences for your public relations. In a 2019 article published in the Journal of Applied Accounting Research, we noted in a meta study that companies that employ positive ESG practices can see value creation on the top and therefore the bottom line. We've modeled out that there's approximately $2.3 billion of revenue at risk here by the year 2025. And tying it all together and making these problems just more magnified is a quote here by your own VP of Global Sustainability, where you note that this push for radical transparency is only growing over time. As the millennial generation becomes the predominant shareholder in the economy, we predict that the push for ESG, increased transparency, and becoming a better steward of the environment will only become more important, exacerbating the impact of these financial repercussions and making these legal citations ever more likely. Here, I'm going to hand it off to Bella to talk about the ethical perspective of our evaluation.
Thank you, Harvey. To begin our analysis of Cargill, we must analyze the ethical standards of the company. As you know, these 7 guiding principles serve as the code of conduct for Cargill. They are ingrained in the company, and they are expected for everyone associated with Cargill to follow, such as employees, suppliers, farmers, producers, manufacturers. Anyone associated with Cargill is expected to uphold these practices. However, throughout its history, Cargill has exhibited a disturbing and repetitive pattern of deception and destruction. It is evident that your board is not upholding these principles and is not prioritizing sustainability in your leadership. More specifically, the company has been unable to achieve their goals of obeying the law and conducting business with integrity. Over the past 20 years, the company has had over 184 violations. And it seems like your board is okay just paying the fines instead of making radical changes in the industry. Cargill has also failed to keep accurate records and honor business obligations. Cargill is constantly not meeting goals set by your leadership. Specifically in 2014, at the United Nations Climate Summit, Cargill CEO David McClellan stood beside the UN Secretary and proclaimed that Cargill would end all deforestation by 2020. This goal was not met. And it's not because of COVID, it's because the leadership failed to make the radical changes in the company necessary for sustainability. Cargill has also failed to treat their employees with dignity and respect. Cargill has exploited the rights of child laborers, migrants, immigrants, indigenous people, and low-income individuals. These people work in your factories, your farms, and your production facilities. You have capitalized on their needs to earn a profit. The U.S. Department of Labor, Occupation, Safety, and Health Administration, known as OSHA, has cited over 23 violations of worker safety at the Dodge City plant. These claims range from poor management, lack of safety equipment, and the list goes on and on. You are not protecting your own employees because you're too concerned about profit. And finally, Cargill has not maintained the goal of protecting assets and being a responsible citizen. Under your leadership, the company has neglected to publish updated and accurate business reports. In the 2020 annual report, there's only 5 pages. For one of the largest companies in the world, working in 70 different countries and producing so many production, 5 pages is not enough to be transparent and actually show your business practices. You say your Cargill's core business model is nourishing the world, but this is not sustainably being met. Even though your company promotes ethical standards, SDGs, and donates millions of monies to nonprofits, your bad practices are outweighing the good. The 3 SDGs we have identified are not being fulfilled by current operations. Specifically, goal number 2, zero hunger. Cargill may be helping feed the world, but they're doing this so unsustainably. Due to your practices, there has been an increase of contamination. The most notable ones were in 2000, when 7 people died, 29 were sick, and 3 women suffered miscarriages due to the outbreak of turkey that caused many people to become ill. As well as in 2009, the New York Times found that Cargill supplied hamburgers filled with E. coli, causing another outbreak. And the most recent one in 2018, the Bureau investigated, and it turned out that Cargill had 70 tons of contaminated meat in supermarkets. Your practices are not sustainable, and they're causing many people to suffer. And then goal number 8, decent work and economic growth. Your practices have ranged from violating trade embargoes to price fixing to ignoring health codes and creating markets for goods to be produced by children in forced labor. However, the most recent one relates to COVID-19. Cargill refused to close facilities, which resulted in over 5,000 employees being contaminated and 5 deaths in your facilities. You are so concerned about profit instead of the work safety of your employees. All of these deaths could have been prevented if you prioritized your own employees. And goal number 12, responsible consumption and production. You have not been responsible in consumption and production. The company has destroyed the Gran Chaco, has enslaved more than 2 million African children, has led to the destruction of the rainforest, which caused the death of over 1,000 orangutans, and has caused a runoff of pollution in Americans' water and air. As a leader of this company, you have an ethical duty to improve sustainability and implement ethical business practices that will allow these SDGs to be met. It is up to your leadership to fix these problems with Cargill. According to Mighty Earth, the political constraints that might have once limited Cargill's power have essentially disappeared. Cargill today has more influence in the world than some governments. Food production relies on you to do the right thing and become the leader the agriculture industry desperately needs. So as we move on to our proposed recommendation, I leave you with this question. How can you continue to nourish the world while meeting both your internal UN SD goals? I will now pass it to Joe to explain our proposed recommendation.
Thank you, Bella. Now that my colleagues have laid the groundwork for the ethical, financial, and legal analysis of Cargill, they've spoken about the scope of your business and how no one legislative body has jurisdiction over you. Let's talk about how we fix it. We believe the solution is a 3-pronged solution that's quite simple. It involves connecting with key stakeholders. This ranges from all the workers on the ground in these 70+ countries and 166,000 employees. You have a unique opportunity to be able to listen and actively listen to your stakeholders. Find out where bottlenecks are and the sustainability problems are. The next phase is to correct the current operations. This is often extremely difficult without actively listening to your stakeholders. There's often a disconnect between higher management and the lower members in the food chain. And this disconnect is often the cause of many problems. Lastly, we urge you to commit to realistic action plans. And with this comes transparency. The world is moving towards transparency and sustainability. To hide from it is foolish. We prefer you take it head on and get ahead of that curve. Make a name for Cargill and prove that you are a sustainable giant, just the way you are in the agriculture business. Now let's hone down into the connect phase. This phase is paramount to the importance of our solution. As I said before, it's important that we listen to our key stakeholders. The person who is out there grabbing the produce and making the corn and the grain is just as important as higher management, and they have different perspectives. In a study done by Phil Howard, who is a sustainability expert and from Michigan State in 2005, he surveyed nearly 2,000 individuals that were consumers in this market and found that a majority of consumers are interested in how their food is grown and processed, how it reaches them, or what's involved in food making and marketing. He went further to say that most consumers would prefer eco-labels on their food to the tune of that the workers got a living wage or the animals were treated humanely and whether food was locally grown. This exemplifies the disconnect between the board of directors' decisions being made and the key stakeholders and farmers. We believe that once we connect with these individuals, it will segue directly into the correct stage, which we'll now talk about. The correct stage is often the hardest stage. It's easiest logistically, but what's difficult about it is it involves a third-party sustainability audit. We have to take credit for what we have done, the good, the bad, and the ugly. At Cargill, we have done a little bit of all of it, and we have to correct these actions. Bella delineated all of the ethical dilemmas that Cargill has currently been facing, and we believe that a third-party sustainability audit fixes most of these dilemmas. The audit done by an outside party eliminates the idea of nepotism or favoritism. It eliminates the idea of hiding information or any unethical practices, and it fully identifies areas of improvement. Beyond that, we believe that you should improve and expand your annual reports and reporting hub. It's important to make these transparent. And one of the main, or a few of the main advantages about correcting all of these decisions are that it focuses directly on demonstrating credibility. You get to learn while you're on the job doing these sustainability reports. More than that, it improves your stakeholder and your investor and confidence in your company. By doing third-party sustainability audits, shows you have nothing to hide, and you'll slowly start stealing share from competitors. Lastly, and most importantly, it'll put you ahead of the curve. We want there to be digitization, and we want Cargill to lead that curve in digitization. And to do that, we have to make our sustainability reports transparent, which brings us to the commit stage. The commit stage is the simplest of the 3 stages. All it is investing in the age of transparency. We want you to commit to the sustainability audits, and we want you to make them transparent. To do this, there's a small process involved. It's important to make short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. Cargill once promised that they would end deforestation by 2030, and they're currently not on track to do that. They're not even on track to be close to make that goal. While we need to make aggressive goals, we need to make realistic goals that are ascertainable. To do this, you need to have short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. You need to commit to making these transparent, and you really need to review these current goals each year to get that feedback from the stakeholders, to put it back into the feedback loop, to really push Cargill ahead of the pack. As I've said before, transparency will push other competitors to also be transparent. As the world's largest private company, going transparent goes a long way. To wrap things back up, we have a simple 3-prong approach. We believe you should connect with the key stakeholders, get to know them and what their problems are, where they're experiencing bottlenecks. After that, correct current operations. Be deliberate and intentional. Use a third-party outsource to really handle the audit and make all that transparent, which brings us to the commit stage. Through your transparency, you will become the sustainability giant and world leader that you already are, but you'll have the PR and image that will back you up. I'm going to toss it over to Flor, where she's going to talk about our impact, how it reaches the SDGs, and how we can really change the world if we follow the sustainability practices.
Thank you, Joe. So you've looked at your company's background, the current practices, and we've given you the recommendation. So let's look at the impact of our recommendation. With our 3-pronged approach, we are able to mediate the legal, financial, and ethical aspects of your business. Legally, when you implement strong internal controls to mitigate these legal risks, the impact is a 50% reduction in lawsuits. As Harvey mentioned, you are currently undergoing a Supreme Court case regarding litigation about unethical labor practices. And while the outcome is unclear because of the capacity and because of the jurisdiction, what we do know is that it is costing you a lot of time, a lot of money, and energy. These are valuable resources that you could be implementing into bettering your own company. So you want to make sure that when we implement these strong internal controls, you can capitalize on these resources. Next, we have the financial aspects. When you implement these strong internal controls and improve production to mitigate these financial risks, you see an NPV of $904 million. We analyzed the cost of investing in these transparency reports and these audits, but we also analyzed the revenues that you would have from the transparency of being a sustainable company and the amount of customers and companies that would want to work alongside you. Lastly, we have our ethical. So the sustainable practices to meet your ethical duty would impact your company by allowing you to abide by the code of conduct and internal goals. With big power comes big responsibility, and you guys are a global leader in the agro industry. You also need to be a leader in sustainability and ensure that the practices that you are doing align with your code of conduct and your laws. Next, we have the SDGs. So as we mentioned earlier, we identified 3 goals where we can improve and ensure that we're meeting the UN sustainability goals. Goal 2 is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. When you implement our strategy, the impact that this has on achieving Goal 2 is that you are able to feed the world as you once promised. You can reduce the foodborne illnesses that you're currently experiencing, such as the outbreaks in E. coli and Salmonella, and you can commit to a sustainable farming solution to feed the world. With Goal 8, you're promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. The impact that this has, our strategy, is that you're able to meet the goals of having decent and respectable work for the very people that abstain and continue to drive your business. Your very organization depends on the people that you are currently exploiting. But the impact of our solution is that you can bridge the gap between these two and have decent work. Next, we have goal 12, which is ensuring a sustainable consumption and production patterns. By having periodic sustainable audits, the impact is that you can correct the production practices with the data that you can gather from these studies, from these reports, and from the audits, so you can see where there's room for improvements. Moving forward, we need to ensure that companies such as yourselves who drive the world are able to be responsible about the earth that your very company depends on. So once you're a leader, you can not only just meet your goals, but exceed it. Recently, National Geographic released Jonathan Foley's 5-point plan, stating that if we want to feed the 9 billion people that we're estimated to have by 2050, we want to ensure that we're implementing this 5-point plan to do it sustainably and in a respectable manner. So with our Connect with Key Stakeholders solution, we can freeze the agro footprint, grow more food on existing farms, and increase the efficiency by connecting with the stakeholders and seeing where we can improve and where we have room to grow food, where we can improve, where we should move out of, and who we are displacing. When we correct current operations, we reduce the meat waste that we currently have with the outbreaks, and we reduce the waste in food production with unsustainable practices. So when we commit to a realistic action plan, we are able to not only meet this 5-point plan, but exceed it and drive the world in a sustainable fashion as a leader. Now I'm going to pass it back to Megan so she can wrap up her presentation.
Thank you. So in conclusion, our solution that we just outlined for you allows you to not only continue fighting world hunger, but also help sustain the planet. We now like to open up for question and answer. Thank you so much.
We want to thank the Sustainable Solution Consulting Team on behalf of the Board of Directors. Thank you very much for your presentation. We have a number of questions for you. I'll start and then we'll go on to other members of our board. The first question has to do with the sustainable development guidelines that was discussed, the goals. And I would like to get a sense of the dialogue from your team and deciding on which SDGs to pursue, focus around, because as I was listening to your presentation, you offered up 3 specific ones. You have sustainability number 2, zero hunger, 8, decent work, and then 12, responsible consumption and production. But if you look at it, and I was just reviewing it as you were speaking, you can add so many more to it. So my question is, you can add 15, water, life on land, and climate action 13, and you can kind of go on and on based on your presentation. So help us understand, how did you prioritize which sustainable development goals was appropriate for this discussion with us?
I can start this one and then some of my teammates may want to hop in. But yeah, that's a great question. When we were looking over this, we looked at each and every goal and really thought of ways that your company, due to large impact, that large reach that you have, could positively impact all of these goals. And really, we should be striving for all of these goals. For the purposes of what's most needed and the immediate action, we identified these 3 because we went back to, what are your core operations? Your core operations are sustaining the world by food production. So we looked at the ones that most directly relate to that. We also looked into where you have recently faced backlash, both in the legal sense and financial and ethical, all senses, and then went off of that. So from that, we found, of course, goal 2, ending hunger, is directly related to your mission. So that's exactly what you all try to do, what you strive to do with your company. Goal 8 really touches on some of the areas that you all have been fined at recently. So in your working conditions, that's one area that's important for us to improve that. And then lastly, goal 12 We really wanted to add that one in because it kind of hones in on the area where we think you all have the most opportunity to grow, and that's in sustainable consumption and production patterns. So that's how we landed on those three.
Okay.
I also want to jump right in and say that these goals actually allow us to segue into the other additional 14 goals. So for example, when we strive to ensure sustainable consumption and production, we ultimately lead to the environment preservation and the other goals that deal with the environment. So this is how we want to segue into the other 13 goals and ultimately get all 17.
Okay, thank you very much. Heather, Chase, Daria, questions, comments?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I'll save I'll stay in character and save my commentary on the presentation and whatnot till later. But Megan, Harvey, Isabella, Joe, Floor, I would love to hear more about, and if you could speak to some of the work that Cargill has already done in this space with ESG issues, and specifically how, some of the context and the color of what things were like before Cargill, and how we compare with our competitors in terms of fines or movement in this space. If there's a way that you can weave in, our classification obviously as a private company versus a public company, that would be helpful to understand how you guys thought about that as you prepared this. Thanks.
So I can start this off. Firstly, Cargill has been around for over 150 years. And so it's very difficult to picture life before Cargill. And Cargill's reach is so extensive that when we try to find competitors that we could analyze and see where they could set an example, it was very difficult to do so because of Cargill's scope. And that's why we really stress the fact that Cargill is so massive and so impactful that we need Cargill to step that foot first and lead by example as to what sustainability looks like. And while Cargill has, for example, donated 30 million in ending deforestation practices, those were as a result as fines that were issued before and other impending charges. So Cargill only has done it as a response and not as a doing it preemptively and being able to do this ahead of the curve. So that's why we want to stress that in an age where sustainability and these ESGs are growing, we want Cargill to step that foot forward.
Yeah, going specifically into that component of the question about this difference between being a private and public company, something interesting to note there is that kind of the most comparable company in this industry at this scale is Nestle, which is publicly traded. And there's essentially the SEC is forcing Nestle to be transparent in that they have to meet the reporting standards that all public companies have to meet. Cargill, your business, is able to kind of hide behind the fact that as a privately held organization, you only really have to give up what information you think is going to benefit you on the market, which is why our solution really gets into pushing this voluntary transparency piece. Basically, open up your books and allow yourself to be audited by a third party before a governmental organization has to step in and force your hand. That's how you really come out of this looking like it's a voluntary position that generates some positive PR instead of a punishment that is being levied down upon you.
To follow up, finally, we just didn't touch on one piece. You had a couple different questions there, but the last question is, what are we doing in this space? And Megan, will you go to the Cargill Global Priorities appendix slide, please? Should be under appendix, yeah. So what's interesting about your company is you're doing a lot of great things. We touched on a lot of the great things you're doing, but it all comes down to where does the onus lie and who does the onus lie on? And as Harvey just mentioned, because you're a private company, you opening up your books, I mean, think about any private company opening up their books like that. It is going to be, it'll be absolutely reinvigorating to your stakeholders. We have nothing to hide. This is everything that we're showing. And so while we're doing a lot right now, while you guys are doing a lot in this space, a lot of it seems to be too little too late or veiled. As we spoke about the Clean Water Act, when we got fined for that, it was 3 years later. We donated this money, $130 million, because we had to. And then, as most big corporations do, we spun it as a PR stunt that we're willing to give this money, $130 million. And we believe that that is really the PR shift that will ultimately earn you money in the long run. By switching and being that sustainability giant, that leader, and opening up your books as a private company, especially a private company that's held by 90% one family, it really instills confidence in your stakeholders. And we believe that is the future, not being lagging behind, but being ahead of the sustainability curve.
Great job, team. Thank you very much. Just to follow up, how much, and it could either be in employees or in revenue. The number I have in front of me is only from 2018, but it looks like about 3.1 billion in net income. How much of that should be reallocated for these initiatives?
Yeah, we put some high level estimates together. Megan, if you want to go to the fines, I think it's the fines and summary finance appendix. So like you mentioned, the revenue of the company is significantly above net income. Our margin's only sitting about 2 to 3%. So we can't spend billions of dollars on this. $1 billion is going to be a third of our earnings in a year. So we have to keep it in the millions. The way we've allocated this is that you see in our 3-pronged solution, we have that correct and commit aspect growing over time. Basically $5 million in additional funding per year. We assume that's going to grow because as we employ this connect component where we're communicating with our stakeholders, that's how we're going to be identifying where to put this money. So as we reach out, we talk to our stakeholders and know where to place the funds, we're going to slowly allocate more and more into those 2 prongs at the bottom going forward. And the only other aspect is this third-party audit and PR campaign, which we anticipate to be about $5 million per year. And we can hold that flat as it's going to be just a reoccurring cost. That's going to be an audit we get completed by probably a Big 4 firm once a year at year end, which we release publicly.
Thank you.
Okay, we got a few more moments for any other questions from any of our judges. I'll add one. It appears to me the theme of what is being shared with us based on your analysis to some extent is that we're just too big. I heard that type of language in tone throughout the presentation and almost brought to mind too big to fail in some respect. And so I wanted to have you drill down a little bit more to the theme that I felt coming across the, is it that we're too big to be efficient and effective at our work, or I kind of build that into a comment around the disconnect between our board and the management and, you know, our employees. Help us with a little bit more of that theme.
I can lead us off. So you hit on some very big points. We talked about how large you are. We continue to harp on this idea that you're a giant organization, quite frankly, because you are. And I know that's a constant theme throughout our progression, but I think the point that we wanted to get across was it's not that you're necessarily inefficient or you're doing things poorly in the efficiency space. It's that no one governing agency can legislate you, can govern you in a meaningful, palatable way. And because of the scope, the size of your company, with this 166,000 employees across 70 countries, you have disconnects, whether they're cultural disconnects, they're disconnects from management to a blue collar employee. These disconnects happen. And oftentimes these disconnects aren't communicated effectively and efficiently. So a big part of our first part of our plan, the connect phase, is getting on the ground. What we didn't talk about is exactly what we want to do. We want to give surveys. We want to be able to talk to these people and give interviews and see where their disconnect is, where the farmers want to connect further. And so the main theme that I believe we were trying to get across is, yes, you're extremely large, you are extremely efficient, but ultimately, if we want to see changes and you want to see changes, then it has to come from internally. And there has to be a desire to want to improve sustainability and the globe in a real way, a real tangible way. And you have to show that. You have to put that information out there and make it transparent, is I believe what we were trying to get across is our main theme.
Okay, wonderful. Any other questions from any of the other judges at this point?
I'm just curious if in all of your conversations, the topic of plant-based came up and if that played into anything that you were looking at in terms of solutions for Cargill?
I'm
I
gonna
can
jump in
start.
again, unless no,
Oh.
Megan, go for it.
Okay, I'm just navigating to the slide, being the PowerPoint driver and answering questions can be challenging sometimes. Let me just get here. Yeah, so we did consider that actually 2 members of our team, including myself, Flora and myself are both plant-based. So we considered that. And in doing consulting work for your company, we wanted to find ways that were actionable and keeping on your foundation. So while meat production is a huge component of your business, we aren't saying to completely eliminate that aspect. We're saying to do it in a more efficient, more sustainable way. So we definitely did look into that. I mean, I know Flora and I would love to be able to come and tell everyone to go vegan, but we also want to find a realistic solution that would help you grow long term and support what you are innately good at, and that is producing food.
I believe it goes hand in hand with what Joe said earlier. He asked why these 3 SDGs, and we wanted to pick SDGs and goals that directly impact your company and align with your culture and your growth. Without doing that, a strategic plan doesn't make sense. We're not trying to separate your culture. We're just trying to help you improve your culture. So as we talked about plant-based, Cargill actually did get dinged in 2019 for using meat-based fillers that later led to a salmonella outbreak, again, affected not only employees, but the stakeholders at large. While we can start to make this transition to plant-based, it's not at the forefront of our plan because it doesn't align with our production and our goals. It would be a large allocation of finances for a relatively small initial return on investment. It's more of a long-term investment that we're looking at down the road once we really have committed to being sustainable and transparent.
I just had one further question. You know, with a company of our size, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of partnerships. Moving forward, as we implement some of your suggestions, are there any baseline criteria that you think we should make sure are mandatory in any new partnerships that we acquire?
So I'll jump in the beginning and someone can follow up. The basis of our strategy was that, as you said, a giant corporation across the globe is going to have thousands of partnerships, and you do. But the biggest part here is that these the Cargill often has suppliers and producers. And while they're not always in control of these partners or suppliers and producers, they're large enough and they have enough scale that they can put pressure in a meaningful way on these individuals that we partner with. And while we do partner with a lot of sustainable companies, there are other companies that maybe aren't as sustainable. As we talked about, Nestle is in the limelight right now for labor practices in the Nestle versus Doe case. And so we really wanted to focus in on producers and suppliers that fall within our realm, but also put pressure on the ones that aren't, because we have that ability being the scale that we are.
Yeah, to add on to that, as Joe's getting at here, a huge benefit to our scale is that we can essentially throw our weight around. So once we come up with what Cargill's own internal goals are going to be, we can put pressure on our supply chain partners to set those same goals. And an obvious control that we can place on them is that we can require our vendors and suppliers to actually commit to these third-party audits and transparency reports themselves. We can get transparency throughout the entire industry, throughout the entire ecosystem in that regard. It's a huge improvement to the visibility that all the stakeholders have in how we're operating in this part of the economy.
To add on to that, I think it's important to make realistic goals. Megan, if you can go to the slide, the 2030 goals for Cargill. Right now, Cargill has a lot of goals in place and they're not on track to meet them. So working with suppliers, they need to make sure that their goals are actionable. And most of these goals on this list were actually goals that they planned to make in 2020, but just got moved up to the 2030 list. So as Cargill, you must really adhere to our plan because you keep on making constant goals and constant recommendations and never achieving them. So working with your suppliers, you really need to look at them and say, what is realistic for both of us to ensure we are being sustainable?
Thank you very much. And just one final question. When you look at companies our size, I can't, whether it be Nike or even Amazon lately, Walmart, et cetera, I can't think of a company that doesn't face these same criticisms and some of these same problems with growth. Who would you say is the best company of this size with these practices?
I think it's hard to find an exact company to compare Cargill to, considering Cargill works with food production. And food production is a basic human right for every single individual on the planet. So Cargill has to look past their competitors because there's truly no one really like them in the industry. Yes, some companies do good sustainable practices, but they don't work with food. Cargill has a huge responsibility to ensure they're implementing sustainable practices because they're doing production on a basic human right for all individuals.
To add on to that, when we were going through this, we looked for exactly that. We looked for, okay, if we're analyzing your company, we want to see who's doing it right, who's doing it your size. And we couldn't find a company in this industry to your scale that is doing this. So that's why we have some examples of great companies that are in the food space, but it's just not the same magnitude that you all have. And that's why we're really suggesting and recommending that you become a leader in this space as far as doing this sustainably, because it is the way that our world has to shift. And as we've shown with all your goals you already have set, it is a priority to your company. We just want to set realistic goals and a realistic path to get there.
To answer the question a little more directly, some tangent markets. Patagonia, I'm sure we're all familiar with Patagonia, extremely sustainable, amazing sustainability practice and very transparent. Cliff Bar as well. They're still in the food space, not nearly as big. Direct competitors, like they said, it's very difficult because we touch on so many fields. The meat market, the grains, the soybean, how do you compare? One is ADM. And when we looked at ADM sustainability goals, they were doing the exact same thing that Cargill is, what you guys are doing, where they had goals for 2020 that kept getting pushed back because they're not quite meeting them. One advantage is they are producing transparent sustainability reports, which shows that this is the direction the field is going. And if Cargill doesn't do it now, they're going to be left behind the pack.
I also want to say that just because we don't have necessarily competitors that we can compare to, consumers are pushing for sustainability and that transparency. I think Joe had shared a study from Philip regarding how consumers are more and more looking towards that sustainability. And that's why we're pushing so adamantly for you guys, Cargill, to really get ahead of that curve and be that one company that people look to and say, okay, this is a competitor, this is what we need to be doing. Because consumers are more and more looking into that, and supply chain members are dropping people who may use palm oil, for example, or contribute to deforestation.
At this point, we want to go ahead and conclude the presentations in the Q&A from the board of directors and transition to a conversation just in terms of coaching and feedback around the presentation. So what I will say, first of all, is give yourself a hand. Great job, well done. And now we can sort of relax a little bit. So kind of go from there. And so I'll start off a few comments and then we'll go around again to our judges and provide again some coaching and feedback. And so I thought clearly that this team did a wonderful job preparing a wonderful slide deck, a wonderful transition in between speakers, very knowledgeable about the topics. You really clearly understood the legal dimensions, the sustainable goals. You were persuasive and effective, I think, in your message. I felt as a board member that it was hard hitting. It was a lot. And my only sort of coaching would be maybe some opening statements around preparing us a bit for that, the reality of what you're about to say. And so we don't get on the defense immediately, because as board members, we love the organizations that we serve and we think the best of them. And so it's hard sometimes to hear, the statements that were shared with us today. And so that's just the only piece there. But again, I think it is, very, very effective in terms of waking us up and making sure that, that we understand our legal and fiduciary duty as a board member for an organization of its size. So with that, the only other advice I would add is, as you think through the next series of presentations, you covered a tremendous amount of information quickly and effectively. How you do that in the next series of presentations for 10 minutes and then 90 seconds, think that's going to be a challenge. So how do you distill down the key components that's going to get the attention of the next series of judges that you'll no doubt be working with from here? And so I also want to thank Heather and Chase and Dara for your participation in the questions. So it's your opportunity now to provide some coaching and guidance.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Everything Joe said, just really bravo, solid presentations, really good teamwork, passing from person to person. Everyone spoke. The storyline was really clear. The design and the navigation of the deck and the story, like I thought really good in terms of the amount of information and whatnot. So just really super solid. On the kind of coaching side of things, like what Joe said, right? Like it's kind of like, oh, I get really defensive. So one of my first questions was, okay, give us credit for what we've done. What did we actually do as Cargill? Like, what did things look like before that? So anything in that spot, I think helps give the context of, without Cargill, all of these people would not have eaten or whatnot. And then you kind of open the ears to your audience, and then they're more receptive to hear clearly a lot of issues that that they have to deal with. And from a personal standpoint, it really perked my interest to learn more about the company. So I thought that was really good. And maybe a bit more on the detail of the solutions. I know you only have X amount of time, so that's really challenging. But the kind of just because we have to and everyone's doing it, there's dialogue playing in their heads, I'm sure, that like, well, but we've already got ESG and we are doing comms and we have a PR program, right? So there's that. And then the only other thing is that you guys are clearly really passionate about it. And I would have liked to see more of that. Like, it's okay to be human and like, they're just people on the other side too. So, but overall, really enjoyable. Thank you so much for all the preparation and the hard work. Really, really well done.